Hi everybody, welcome to Adobe Live on Behance.net. My name's Michael Jarrett. I'm here with Jesús Ramirez. Welcome.
Hey, Michael.
This is Photoshop Week. We're live on our second day. We were just joined by Nathaniel Dodson earlier today, and following this stream, we've got Shauna Lynn. So really amazing week. I think it's Photoshop. It's mostly geared for beginners, so there's a ton of great tips and techniques to learn here. And we had an XD Daily Creative Challenge this morning. Today we've also got a creative challenge for Photoshop, so if you want to participate in that during our stream, go ahead and check out the challenge tab. Today we're focusing on creating a postcard in Photoshop. So design a postcard for your hometown, wherever that is. Go ahead and use brushes, text, colors, photos, anything you want, make it creative. Make it about your hometown, and we're going to take a look at all those submissions at an hour and a half in from now. It's always really amazing to see everybody's work. It's surprising. People are watching, people are creating. And also, if you're not aware, if you're a first-time joiner, we do a chat and win in about 30 minutes. So if you're participating in chat, ask a question, let us know where you're from, say hi, and we've got a really cool prize to give away, which I'll announce a little bit closer to that time in 30 minutes. But for now, welcome back, Jesús, day 2. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. I know yesterday I was really, really impressed. I learned a ton of things, even working at Adobe for the time that I have. There's still so many new things to learn in Photoshop. You've uncovered a ton of them. I'm sure we're going to see more today.
No, none at all.
No secrets.
No, of course. We're going to have a lot of fun today. We're going to be working with mainly two things, blending modes and blending images together using blending modes. We're going to do some image distortions and manipulations and blending things together to create new images. So
Sweet.
It's compositing like yesterday, but just focus on different areas and techniques.
Right. Yeah, definitely the focus of these streams yesterday, today, and tomorrow has been the fundamentals of compositing in Photoshop, which in short is taking at least 2 images, probably more, combining them together in a new way, either to create a realistic scene or to create something a little bit, I think today it's going to go a little bit more graphical, right? A little edgier, which is kind of cool. So we'd love to encourage everybody to ask questions as we go through the projects today. It can be, anything related to Photoshop, maybe techniques that you're seeing on screen, ways of things, that you don't know how to do. Total expert right here sitting next to me. Always a great source of information. Do you want to go through any of your Behance projects to show a little bit of your work?
Sure. So we were on yesterday, so I guess I'll discuss the different projects so that you get people get a feel of the type of work that I've done. Since we're talking about compositing, I guess I can focus on a personal project. I'm a big Spider-Man fan, and actually that's how I started getting into Photoshop. I really liked drawing as a kid. I used to draw comic book characters all the time. Spider-Man was my favorite, and I used to scan my Spider-Man drawings and then color them in Photoshop, and that's how I taught myself how to use layer styles, blending modes, which we're going to talk about today, and all these cool things. So I highly encourage people to work on personal projects because, at least for me, that's how I develop my skills. Because sometimes if you're working on something that you're not passionate about, you may not push yourself, or you might not work those extra hours. So with personal projects, again, at least for me, it helped me develop some skills. So this is one of my latest personal projects. Is based on Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and it's a composite. It was created, I forget the number of images, but here they are. These images here were used to create that composite. And they're all from Adobe Stock, by the way. I really, really recommend Adobe Stock. I use it all the time. I talked about yesterday. I talked about the Make a Masterpiece campaign, which used 1,200 layers. Using Adobe Stock images. So, I use them for everything.
But I think even this, what's most impressive to me, this is a smaller selection of images than the project that you showed yesterday. But in the final image, there's one figure. You have Spider-Man, you have Miles Morales right there, and yet you kind of had to use different pieces from at least 7 or 8 different photos, which is really impressive.
And if for those of you that didn't watch the stream, and for those of you who did watch it, if you didn't watch it, you can watch the replay. If you watched it, you'll remember that we talked about matching color, for example. So all those little basic techniques that we learned yesterday, I applied to a composite like this. So I think we talked about it yesterday, that once you learn the fundamentals and what to look for, then you can start building on that to create larger and larger projects.
Right.
So that's all it is, really, just learning the fundamentals and building on that. So yeah, so this is something that I've done. So if you're interested in more about my work, you can check me out at Behance at JR from PTC. I also would like to direct people to my Instagram page, which is also the same screen name, JR from PTC. And for those of you that don't know, I have a YouTube channel called the Photoshop Training Channel, which is a YouTube channel where I post at least one video a week with a brand new Photoshop tutorial. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today, you can find in some of the videos. I actually have a playlist called compositing tutorials. So if you click on the playlist tab, somewhere in here you'll see a compositing here you go, compositing tutorial. So I have 46 nice. 45 46 compositing tutorials. So if you're interested in compositing, then you can check that out. But if you're ready, I guess we can start with Photoshop.
I'm ready, yeah.
All right.
Everybody, I hope you're ready. We're gonna start working in Photoshop.
We're gonna start working in Photoshop. So we're gonna spend the first part of this stream talking about blending modes. Blending modes are mathematical equations. They help you blend images together based on luminosity, color, or hue, or a combination of the three. And the cool thing about blending modes is that they're non-destructive, and you can apply them to anything in the layers panel. Non-destructive simply means that we can come back and change them at a later point if we need to.
Which was like the most foundational lesson from yesterday, and always working in Photoshop, is if there's a non-destructive way to do it, which means not permanently altering the pixels.
Exactly.
Go for it, because it saves you a ton of time and allows you to adjust if you need to go back and change something later.
Oh, yeah, exactly. If you're on Photoshop CC, which I highly recommend everyone to get, especially if you're just interested in Photoshop, I think the photography plan is like, what, $9 a month or something like that? Yeah, so not expensive at all, because you'll just have everything that you'll need, and it's always being updated. Now, if you have older versions of Photoshop, you can still follow along with this stream, because most blending modes, the 19 original blending modes, were added to Photoshop 3.0 in 1994. So I'm sure that everybody watching is using.
We really hope so.
Yeah.
If anybody's using Photoshop 1.0, let us know. You can maybe follow along.
Yeah, maybe. But Photoshop 7 added 5 more blending modes. So if you have Photoshop 7 or newer, you'll be able to follow along. There are more blending modes added, hard mix in 2003 with Photoshop CS, and in CS 5, the 2 newest blending modes. So it's safe to say that most people watching will be able to follow along with blending modes. So I just wanted to point out that no matter what version you have, you will be able to follow along. So how the blending modes work? Let me just enable this layer and just I'll delete that adjustment layer. So we have 2 layers here, right? We have this background, which is the base, and this texture, which is the blend layer. The layer on top, we can blend it with the layer below based on either luminosity, color, or saturation, or a combination. The blending modes drop down is here, and you can see these little dividers, and I have a graphic that's gonna make it more clear in a moment, but there's these little dividers that divide the blending modes into groups. In Photoshop's CC 2019, the latest version, you can just hover over the blending modes to see what the result is. So, for example, if I go into the multiplied blending mode, multiplied hides the brighter pixels and it keeps the darker pixels. So it's using luminosity. So if we create a levels adjustment layer and click on this icon to clip it to the layer below, which means that you're going to only affect that layer right under it. That's what this little down pointing arrow here is telling you. It's telling you that adjustment layer is only going to affect that layer. We can make an adjustment, and notice that by making that adjustment, we change the blend. Why? Because we're changing the luminosity of that layer. So then therefore the blend changes.
Yep.
So very simple. Changing luminosity, it changes the blend when we're using the multiply blending mode. So that's before and after. I'm gonna close this file, and I have another one that helps you see the different categories of blending modes just a little bit better. So we have the different blending mode categories, and they're right there. On the top, we have the normal category, which simply means that the way of blending the layers is controlled by the opacity slider. So if we have this layer and it's set to normal, the only way we can blend it with the layer below is by reducing the opacity, like so. Dissolve does exactly the same thing, but it does it in this noise dither pattern. But when the opacity is set to 100%, you can see the entire layer. So that's what normal means. Then we have the darken group, which makes things darker. We were just using the multiply blending mode, so it was hiding the bright pixels and keeping the dark pixels. Lighten does the opposite. We keep the bright pixels and hide the dark pixels. Contrast both brightens and lightens depending on the pixel that you're using. So if you have a photo, let me show you like this one here that has both dark and bright pixels, then you'll notice how overlay both brightens in this area and darkens in this area. If it's 50% gray right in the middle, then it won't make a change. It'll just become invisible. So that is really, really important to keep in mind when you're compositing, because you're gonna come up across different images and you are gonna wanna create different effects. Yesterday, for the people that watch, we placed a texture layer of snow in front of our model.
Right.
And it was up against a black background. So we use the screen blending mode to hide the black background. So I know this might seem a little confusing if you're just starting out, but this is really, really, really important to understand, because once we move on to the project that we're going to work on 2 different projects that use exclusively blending modes. You're going to see, you're going to understand better how it works. So rather than just telling you switch the blending mode to multiply and then do this, now you have an idea of why we're choosing a specific blending mode. So that's the whole theory behind me showing you all these graphics, because I know it might not be that fun now, but once we start working with the actual images, you'll understand why, and it'll be even more fun.
Right. Well, and often I think before an understanding of blending modes comes more of sort of like an experimental, like, oh, let me see what these do. Mm-hmm. And, you know, sometimes you can just visually understand or achieve a result. Maybe you weren't expecting it, but you're like, oh, that's kind of cool, but never really understand what exactly is happening behind the scenes. So it's a great kind of lesson to learn. And if anybody has any questions more about blending modes either now or as we kind of start to see them being used in practice, please let us know and we'll answer them on stream.
Yeah, and just adding to your point a little bit, a lot of times you already know what you want to do. You want to make something darker, brighter, add contrast. Yeah. So you can only focus on that specific group instead of going through the entire list.
Right.
At least you know you can narrow it down to 5 blending modes that could possibly work.
Right, and it's cool that you can hover and see them now, because it used to be that you literally had to go click
for
on
those,
one and check it out.
3 people who have Photoshop, what was it, 3.0? Yeah, you can't do that. You can't do the...
And there's no hard mix.
Yeah, and there's no hard mix. Also, there's one something I wanted to point out in case we have some photographers who are working in with like 32-bit images. Not all blending modes are available in 32-bit images, so you only have these blending modes available. So the blending modes that are, if you're working with 8-bit images, then you'll have all of them available. And just for reference, I may be referring to a layer as a base layer, blend layer, or the result. Base layer is simply the layer on the bottom. The blend layer is the layer where you change the blending mode, and the result is the combination of those two layers. So if I say those words, now you'll know what I mean.
Super helpful.
And for those of you that like keyboard shortcuts, you can actually use keyboard shortcuts to select a specific blending mode. So if you hold Alt and Shift on a PC, often Shift on a Mac, and then click any one of those letters, you'll immediately change the blending mode of the currently selected layer to that blending mode. So you can use a keyboard shortcut if you like.
It's kind of interesting to see these letter designations. I mean, I'm sure there are sort of experts out there who've somehow mastered oh, of course K is darken. And,
right. And you know what? I don't remember all these keyboard shortcuts, to be honest with you. But for example, overlay is one that I use often. Soft light is one that I use often. Multiply and screen. So those would be 3, 4 that you should memorize. I mean, I probably have never used exclusion on a project, so I'm not going to remember that keyboard shortcut. So just remember the ones that are beneficial to you, or at the very least, you can hold Alt-Shift and the plus and minus keys to scroll up and down the list. But these days it's also really simple with the new version of Photoshop that you could just hover over the different blending modes. And for some reason that didn't. Oh, I was in the wrong layer. You can hover over the different blending modes, and they change.
Cool.
All right. So let me just make. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to show you, I think. And this is super cool. So these 8 blending modes are really, really important because they react differently than the other blending modes. And what I mean by that is that when you have a layer and you bring down the opacity of most blending modes, it reacts the same way when you bring down the fill. But for these guys, the guys in yellow, changing fill reacts different than changing opacity. So you actually have an extra level of blending that you can do when you use these blending modes. And not only that, they even give you one extra cool feature that I really like showing people because it works great for compositing, and I actually referenced it yesterday about creating highlights, and I remembered about it this morning, so I really, really wanted to show you guys in case somebody remembers from yesterday. But basically, if you wanted to create like a really bright highlight on something, I can just, let me just select a soft brush here. I can paint with white, and one of the blending modes in that list, you'll notice, is color dodge. So if I select the color dodge blending mode, it looks exactly the same as normal. If I bring down the opacity, you'll notice how that looks flat at 76%. Watch the same amount of percentage on color dodge. See that? And no longer it looks flat. It looks actually brighter. But you can take it an extra level to create a blend that makes it look more like a highlight hitting that building. And I know it's a daylight scene and it's not very realistic, but you'll get the idea. If you come to the side of the layer and double click on it, that will bring up the layer style window. Now, most things in Photoshop, I know why they happen, and this is one of the few things that I don't know why it happens. I just know that it works. So I don't know everything. But if you uncheck transparency, shapes, layers, watch what happens to the edges. See that? See how the edges change? I'll do that again. And I'll increase the fill opacity back up to 100%. So that's, see that difference?
Yeah.
So then now, that could be like a specular highlight or something hitting the building or a car or whatever. So this is a great technique for creating really strong highlights on an image. So when you're compositing, it happens all the time. You have a light source and maybe you have something shiny metallic, or it doesn't have to be shiny or metallic. As long as you want it to look a little bit brighter, you can use this technique.
Huh, really interesting. So what would you say is actually happening to the edge when you uncheck that selection?
So the closest I've gotten by reading HelpX and other material where they talk about the difference between fill and opacity and unchecking that is just that the algorithm looks at transparency differently when you uncheck that box, but specifically I wouldn't be able to tell you what the algorithm is looking at. And one of the things that I read somewhere online, and I wish I could tell you where so I could give the person credit, was that nobody's really sure outside of Adobe because the algorithms are proprietary. So
yeah.
We just yeah. So people just know that when you uncheck it, something happens in the algorithm and how it reads the transparency around it, and it changes. But
yeah,
I don't.
You
I
know,
wouldn't
some
be
of
able
the
to.
best things in life are still mysteries.
Yeah.
So, as long
but if
as
somebody
it works,
knows, please put it in the chat because I love to know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Will we see that technique used today?
Yeah, we will.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
So I just wanted to, kind of like yesterday, I'm showing you little examples now, and then we'll bring it together on a larger composite.
Great.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so we're gonna start with a double exposure effect. And we have 2 layers. We have our model and we have this cityscape. And just as a side note, that's actually the same cityscape that I used on my Behance project. This is a little side note. I made a I made that in Adobe Dimension. So the background, those buildings, you'll recognize they're the same one. So this is just a 3D model created in Adobe Dimension, which we'll touch on a little bit tomorrow. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out. That's the same image.
Those are the famous Adobe product pillows.
There. Yeah. Actually, you know what? In real life, I have the Photoshop one and I have the Illustrator one, but I don't have the Dimension one. I don't even know if they make a Dimension one, but if they do, I would like one.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's the same photo. So a really popular effect that I'm sure many of you have seen is the double exposure effect. It's a really popular, especially with photographers. And it's actually a really simple effect to create using blending modes. Now you can create this effect with an image that has, with two images that have backgrounds. I find that in some cases it looks better if at least one image does not have a background. So in this case, the model doesn't have a background. If you have a photo that has a background and you don't want to use a background, I'll briefly touch up on that. Let me just find a photo here. So we'll use this model here. Let me just open it up. And by the way, these are my Adobe stock images that I have on my Creative Cloud account. So I'm just going to show a really quick way of removing the background. So it's not going to be perfect, but you'll get the idea.
Yeah.
So yesterday, you might remember that we used a quick selection tool to click and drag and make selections. But then we also learned that in Photoshop CC 2018, I believe, we got the new Select Subject button, which uses Adobe Sensei, Adobe's artificial intelligence, to select the subject. So Photoshop will analyze the image, figure out what the main subject is, and we'll see how good of a job it does. So we clicked on that, and it did a pretty good job selecting her. It's not perfect, but we can just simply hold Alt, Option on the Mac, and click and drag in these areas where she wasn't in between her arms, so to deselect that area. And then we can click on the layer mask icon to create a mask, and the background is gone. And
it's less than a minute,
super quick
process.
Super
you can go
quick.
refine later.
Yeah, and you can refine later. And we talked about that yesterday. So that area here, I wouldn't worry about it till the very end, because again, I don't know if it's gonna work, so I don't wanna spend time fine-tuning things that are not gonna work and that they're not gonna be it's not going to be worth me fixing, because again, when we start blending images together, maybe that's not even noticeable, so I don't have to worry about it. So anyway, so that's how you would remove a background, but in this case, I'm just using an image that doesn't have a background. So the way that I like to work is in my real life, I'm not very organized, but when it comes to Photoshop, I'm extremely organized.
Good.
So I like to organize things in Photoshop so that I could control them better. I'm a control freak when it comes to Photoshop, so I want to be able to control this image as best as possible. So before I start creating the effect, I'm going to organize the layers. And what I mean by that is I'm simply going to create a group, and I'm going to call this group bottom image, and I'm going to click and drag my model in there. Then I'm going to make another group, and I'm going to drag it on top, and of course I'll call it top image. Then I'm going to click and drag that city image and drag it into the top image group. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a black and white adjustment layer, which will turn the image, of course, black and white. Then I will create an exposure adjustment layer, which of course will help us change the exposure of the image, basically how bright or how dark it is. And then there's this reset button here that you can click to reset the layer. And I'll do exactly the same thing on the top layer. I will create a black and white adjustment layer to make the image black and white. And I will create an exposure adjustment layer. And there it is. So now that I created those layers, sometimes it's a good idea to label them by add a color label. So I'll just make the bottom one orange and the top one blue, just to keep things organized. So there it is. Now, we talked about blending modes on layers, but we haven't talked about blending modes on groups. So before I click on the group, do you know what the default blending mode for a group is? I'm quizzing you.
Pass through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a good one. Most people don't know. No wonder you work for Adobe.
Right.
Give me 1 second.
That was on my interview.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that got you the job. Yeah. Yeah, so as Michael said, when you select the group, the default blending mode is pass through. It's not normal. Pass through is just that. It just means that everything that it's in that group is like as if it were in the layer stack. It's just going to pass through. So in other words, imagine that the group is not there, or the group is only being used for organizing the layers,
right,
not really affecting how they behave. But if we change the blending mode to something else, then the group changes. And let me set up the layers so that you can see what it's going to do here. So if I disable the black and white adjustment layer for the model and disable the background, you'll see that the top image group is also affecting the luminosity, or excuse me, the color of the group under it, the bottom image. If I change the blending mode to normal, notice that that adjustment layer no longer affects the model, but it affects the background. So when you change the blending mode to anything else besides pass through, essentially what you're doing is merging the group. So when you have a group and you press Control-E, Command-E on the Mac, you merge it into a single layer, right? So it's essentially the same result that you get. So you get the result without actually merging it.
Right.
So the advantage of doing that, and we'll talk about it more in a different example, is that you can create all these different adjustment layers, and by simply setting the blending mode to normal, those adjustment layers will only control the layers inside of that group. So that's another way of...
So you can avoid either clipping them or having to prematurely merge something together.
Exactly, or create a ton of layer masks to target one layer. So anyway, so what I'm going to do here is simply change the blending mode to lighten, like so. And then I can enable the black and white adjustment layer, and I can enable my exposure adjustment layer, which is not going to make a change. And let me expand this group, or the panels rather, so that you can see what's inside of the group. So just right there, very easily, we already created the double exposure effect. Now what we're doing now is adjusting how the double exposure is going to affect how the exposure is going to affect the result. So if you remember from the earlier example, on the texture example, I used a levels adjustment layer to control the luminosity of the texture, and it changed how the texture was applied to the background.
I see, yeah.
So once again, the group here, I'm using lighten. So that is a blending mode that reacts to luminosity. So if I adjust the exposure of that blending mode, you'll see, or I'm sorry, the exposure of that layer, you see how I'm affecting how that layer behaves. So at this point, it's just fine tuning it and making it look the way that you like. See that?
And so in this case, is it the lighter parts of the blend image that are kind of responding to the lighten, or is it about what the darker parts of the bottom image are, or is it both?
It's both actually, because I also have an exposure adjustment layer here. And if I change that, you see how it changes the image. Now, something that I don't think I've mentioned yet, the lighten blending mode, the easiest way of describing it is it just looks at the pixels below, and it looks at all the pixels, and it keeps the brightest one. So obviously, if you change the brightness of the pixel, it changes which pixel it keeps. That's a very simplified way of describing what that blending mode does, but it'll do the job in your head and understanding how it works. But all you need to do is just change the blending mode. Now at this point, it's all fine tuning from here, right? So maybe you don't want a black and white image. Well, you can just disable the black and white adjustment layer if you want, or you can disable both and then get a different result.
Yeah.
Or another thing that you can do is you can either decide to select the city or the model. In this case, I think I'll do the city, and I'll just press Control-J, Command-J on the Mac to duplicate that layer. Click and drag it above everything else outside of the group, and I'll just change the blending mode to color. Color is the saturation and hue of the layer. Just for those of you that are starting out in Photoshop and you don't know what I mean by hue and saturation, I just double clicked on the foreground color picker, and it brings up this color picker window. Hue is simply what color it is. So this is this bar here. See that? I'm changing the hue. That's what that H stands for. Saturation is the intensity. So if I move from left to right, you'll see that saturation at 0, it's no intensity. And saturation at 100 gives you the most intense blue that you can get. Brightness, of course, is the luminosity, how dark or bright it is. So the color blending mode is using two of those components, hue and saturation, which creates that effect there.
You ready for this?
Ready? Oh,
It's chat and win time. It kind of snuck up on us.
okay, awesome. Let's do it.
All right, so we'd love for you to participate in chat right now. Let us know where you're from. Let us know your favorite blending mode, maybe. And one random lucky winner is going to get some free stickers, which we'll talk about in just a minute. All right, welcome back. Thanks for doing chat and win. I know we're going to see the chat kind of blow up here, and
Overlay.
somebody's
stickers.
got overlay. Someone said multiply. So we're going to generate a random name from the people participating in chat right now on Behance, and the lucky winner today, this week, is going to get 100 free stickers from Sticker Mule. These are going to be 3x3 stickers, and if there's one thing I love, it's definitely stickers. So that name will resolve right here in just a minute. But good news is that anybody participating in chat today can use a special URL that we'll put up there and get 10 stickers for $1. Just go to stickermule.com/AdobeLive19. 10 stickers, enough to cover a laptop.
For sure.
Maybe like half of the bumper of your car or vehicle.
Yeah. Or the screen of the laptop that'll
Right,
work too.
if you don't want to like work.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew Ruiz, congratulations. You're the winner.
Congratulations.
Yeah, you're the winner of 100 free stickers from Sticker Mule. We'll message you about that deal. Everybody congratulate Andrew on his incredible contribution to the chat and win.
Congratulations. Oh man, somebody likes darken and luminosity. Nice.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
darken and luminosity.
Pretty cool.
All right, so we're back with this cityscape.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could stop at this point, but I just want to show people a couple more things they can do in case they want to take their double exposure effects further. And one of the things that I wanted to show you guys is that you can create a solid color adjustment layer, or fill layer, rather, that's the technical term, a fill layer, not an adjustment layer. So this solid color fill layer, you can select a color, any color that you want. So I don't know, maybe we'll go with this beige color. And if we change the blending mode to multiply, we can get that nice color effect there. And you can double click on the solid color fill thumbnail and adjust the color just to give it just this nice little beige color. And I'll actually drag this color copy like right above that, and then maybe just bring down the opacity and just maybe just add a little bit of color. Again, it's up to you how you fine tune the image. And I'll just leave it with the beige color because that's how I like it better. And one of the things that I like doing, as you guys saw yesterday, I think I showed it in 2 examples. For sure, I showed it with the pyramid. And I think I also showed it with the runner composite, which was, I like selecting the layers. So I'm holding shift, clicking on the top layer, clicking the bottom layer, right clicking, and converting it into a smart object, which is a container, a shell that allows you to apply filters non-destructively, which means you can come back and edit them. So one of the filters that I like applying is the camera raw filter. So filter, camera raw filter, and this filter allows me to adjust the color tonality of the image. And I know it looks a little weird because Photoshop is looking at the entire image, but I'm only really focused on this side. Right. And actually, to avoid that, let me show you guys how to avoid it. If I wanted to avoid that, what I would do is just create a group. So Control G, Command G on the Mac to put it into a group. Control A, Command A to make a selection around the canvas. Create a layer mask, and then, if it works, and go to Convert to Smart Object. When I go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, I should only see that box. All right, so now there's some transparency there, but that's okay. I'm only looking at the actual area that I...
Which is cool. That way you don't have to, again, prematurely crop an image and delete those extra pixels if for some reason you needed to go back in and move the background a little bit. Exactly.
So the screen resolution is making this window just a little too large, so I'm just gonna bring that down. And what you would do in this panel, just like I showed you yesterday, is just adjust the luminosity of the shadows and highlights. Again, this is purely subjective. A couple things that I usually tend to do is add clarity, which is contrast in the midtones. We don't really need vibrance, but we talked about vibrance yesterday, which is a smarter way of adding saturation. You protect skin tones and already saturated pixels. But what I will do in this example is increase the sharpening. And again, we talked about the masking slider in the sharpening section. Right now, sharpening is being applied to the entire image. But if I hold Alt, Option on the Mac, you'll see that it turns white. So this is like a layer mask. It's completely white, which means that it's applying the effect to the entire layer. But if we click and drag to the right, you'll see that it's now targeting the edges of the design. So once you find the edges that you're happy with, that Photoshop will only apply the sharpening effect to those edges. And for something like this, I probably will bump up the grain pretty high. So I'll zoom in so you can see what that looks like, just to make it more grungy. And again, these values are all subjective. So whatever you think looks best for your image. So something like that. And press OK when you're done. And the great thing about all this, the workflow that I show you, putting the layers into groups and organizing everything, makes it really easy to come back and edit. If you're working for yourself and it's a personal project, you don't have to be so organized. But if you're doing it professionally, I highly recommend it, because if this were a project for a client and the client decides to change something, you can easily go back and make that edit, and you don't have to spend hours recreating something.
Recreating from the start.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And a couple ways that you can edit things is you see the camera raw filter here. You can double click on it, and the camera raw filter comes again, and you can edit those camera raw adjustments. Or you can double click on the Smart Object thumbnail. It opens up in a new tab, and you can come in here and make adjustments to the exposure adjustment layer, or you can even move the layers. Maybe you want the buildings on this side or whatever it is. We'll just put them here for now. I can close it, save it, and that adjustment updates on the final image.
Yep, with all the camera raw.
With every single thing adjusted. Yeah. That's correct. Now, this is, we're done with this section, but I just thought of one cool blending mode trick that I want to show you guys. And let me see if I can do it with this image. I think this is not the best one. Let me just find another image here that has a few more colors, because I think you will really like it.
Cool. And while he's doing that, I want to remind everybody that we're about 50 minutes away. That's 50 minutes away from taking a look at today's daily challenge submissions. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just to the right of the chat tab, you'll see details about today's challenge. We're asking you to make a postcard using brushes, textures, color, type, use Photoshop, and the postcard should be about your hometown. And I always think this is really interesting. I know we have a pretty global audience, and we'd love to kind of see where you're from. Maybe your postcard is celebrating where you're from. Maybe it's an interesting landmark, whatever it is. If you're able to get it in on time, in just under an hour, we're gonna take a look at that. And we'll actually kind of pick, at the end of the day, one of our favorites, and that person will win a 1-year subscription to Creative Cloud. And that all takes place at the end of the day. But we'll be taking a look at them on screen. So it's a great way to get some work experience, do a challenge, use Photoshop, use some of the skills you've learned today, and then also get a little bit of feedback on air. Awesome. We got it. We got some color.
We got some color, yeah. So this is just a quick tip that I thought about as I was working, because a lot of times when I'm presenting, I'm like, oh man, that'd be a cool thing to show, that'd be a cool thing to show. And next thing you know, I got 40 good things to show in the back of my head, and we run out of time.
Yeah.
But this is a cool trick. And actually, I gotta give credit, because I didn't come up with this. I believe the first person that ever came up with this technique is a friend of mine, Mark Heaps, who is a Adobe Max speaker and a really good friend of mine. But anyway, so with the black and white adjustment layer, as you saw earlier, we make an image black and white. In the properties panel, we have these sliders that control the luminosity of the original color. So you can see how I'm making what was originally green really, really dark. See that? Those were green. And with this slider, the green slider, I can adjust the luminosity of those colors, right? Which is great. And this is how you would make some really, really cool black and white images, of course. But using blending modes, we can actually give this adjustment layer even more power.
Cool.
So if you remember, all colors have 3 components: hue, saturation, and brightness. We can tell Photoshop to use this adjustment layer and only affect one of those components. And the one that works great for this adjustment layer is luminosity. It brings the color back, and now you can control the luminosity of those colors. See that? See how I'm just controlling the green now? And the red. So look, I can make the red white or black.
I see.
I can do the same with the green.
Yeah, so typically these sliders would only be used to sort of, you have a color image, you say, I want to make this black and white, but I want to use these controls to fine tune the black and white appearance of it.
Right.
Because the default might not be the most interesting.
Yeah.
But now you're using these sliders, but not black and white.
Right.
That's pretty interesting. Is there another way to do this, or is this
there's one more actually with Camera Raw is the other way of doing it.
I see.
So with the layer selected, you can go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter.
I think I know where this is going.
Yeah.
Hue saturation sliders.
Exactly, hue and saturation sliders, yeah. And again, this is really, really big every time I open it. But if you go into the HSL sliders, you can click on Luminance, and you basically have the same sliders here.
So is there any advantage to working in that other way? Maybe instead of converting to Smart Object and opening Camera Raw Filter, is it a little less taxing on the...
Yeah, and it also becomes more useful if you're using layer mask. You can, of course, use a layer mask on a Camera Raw filter, but if you're if you already are applying a Camera Raw filter for whatever reason, but you only want to use this adjustment layer on a certain specific area, then you have that layer mask available to you. So, and also, you have the opacity and all these different things that make it a lot easier to work for.
Yeah.
Because to be frank with you, if you were really using this technique, the way that you would most likely use it is by maybe targeting just this part. So then I would change the blending mode to luminosity, and then obviously this is going to be a really, really rough selection, but there's my selection. I can delete this layer mask, make a new one, and now I'm just targeting that area, and I don't have to worry about affecting his hand if I'm changing the reds, for example.
Cool.
So that's the flexibility of using an adjustment layer.
That's amazing.
So once again, I know for sure that I learned it from my friend Mark Heaps, and I believe he was the first person to come up with it way back in the day.
That's way back in the day.
Way back
That's
in
amazing.
the day. Yeah. But yeah, so that was the one trick that I thought about showing you guys when I opened up the black and white adjustment layer earlier.
It's cool. You can build your own HSL sliders.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, let's move on to the next.
I think we have some layer-based jokes happening in the chat.
What are the layer-based jokes?
Okay, first one was, did you hear about the lonely layer at the party? He was trying so hard to blend in. Wow.
That's a good one.
And then, of course, what is the favorite city for a layer? And it's opacity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the right reaction. If anybody has any more layer-based jokes or blending mode-based jokes, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah.
Maybe the best one can win something.
All right, which one's the best one so far?
I think so hard to blend in.
Yeah, that's one I'm liking the most so far. All right.
I think what we say when we like something the most, it's like the one that makes you just want to go.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Those are the best jokes. All right, keep them coming, everybody.
Let's move on to the next little project here.
Cool. If anybody has any questions, I know that there's ample opportunity for us to kind of answer some things as well. What are we going to work on now?
We're going to create a window reflection effect. So we have this lady checking her phone, and we want to make it seem as if we're taking a photo from behind a window, and we can see the reflection of the city behind it.
That's awesome. I've done this before.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, but
awesome.
I have
Go
no
ahead.
No, yeah, right. No, I'm curious to see how we'll get this done.
All right. So this is going to come to no surprise. We're going to use blending modes for that.
Blending modes.
And sure, we can just slide down the list of blending modes and figure out which one looks the best. But now, with the information that we learned, we can kind of narrow it down, right?
Yeah.
So we wanted to make this seem like, this layer seem like it was a glass reflection. Then we would use a blending mode that brightens the layer. So we can use any one of the blending modes in this category here. Lighten or screen will give us good results, and you can just decide which one gives you the best results. So I think screen looks pretty good. And again, if you're using a different image, maybe the luminance values of the image will give you a better result using a different blending mode, but at the very least, you know what category of blending modes you're using, or you should use. So there you go, that's it, we're done.
We just dial it in a little, maybe lower the opacity just a touch, and it's it.
And that's it. So actually what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set it to normal first, and I actually, now that you saw how we got to that point, there's actually more things that you have to take into consideration. We talked yesterday about perspective. We really don't have to worry too much about perspective in this example. We can see that the converging lines of the table lead to some sort of, let me press Control R, Command R on the Mac to get my rulers. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to create a horizontal ruler, but accidentally, since I was talking and not paying attention, I went to my vertical ruler. If you ever do that, you can just hold Alt, Option on the Mac, and it flips. See that? So you can flip it. And anyway, so the converging lines in the scene would probably, oops, yeah, I didn't release it in the right. I released the Alt button before dropping the guide. But anyway, so the converging lines will probably lead to a horizon line that is more or less in that line. And again, we talked about this yesterday. In case you missed it, you can follow all the converging lines in a scene, and you probably will end up in some vanishing point right around there. It doesn't have to be perfect. So with the background, we can more or less say that the horizon line is right about there. So we were not too far off. So we're okay. So we don't have to worry about that. The next thing that we have to look at is in this photo, she is in focus. Notice that her plate and her cup are also really blurry. Everything behind her.
Over here. There it is.
Oh, here. Should we move? Yeah, there you go, blurry, right there. So that means that the depth of field is really shallow. So she's in focus. When I enable this layer, you'll notice that the furthest point is actually in focus. So that would have to be blurry if it were a real photo. And to work non-destructively, you would convert the layer into a smart object, go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and just experiment. For now, we'll just go to 4.6 and see how that looks, and we can adjust it later. Press OK. And I'll go and change the blending mode to screen again. It's before and after. I'm not sure why that came up, but anyway. So you can see that just by adding that one blur, the image is already looking much, much more realistic. Yeah. Then you can then start fine tuning it. We can reduce the opacity, and notice that by reducing the opacity, we start getting a more realistic effect. I can create a new solid color fill adjustment, and maybe I'll select a dark green, and I can experiment with different blending modes. I could try using that multiply technique I used earlier, or I could even try a hue, saturation, or color adjustment. In this case, I'll probably use color to apply the hue and saturation of that green, but keep the luminance values of the layer below. And then I can adjust it. So I'll bring the saturation down. So I just want to apply this greenish tint to the window, so it's not completely, transparent. I just want a little tint in there.
And suddenly all it needs to say is like, do your mobile banking over lunch, and you have
exactly.
Like an advertisement.
There you go. We have we have the negative space right on the side.
Urban bank, yeah.
Exactly, right. And actually, this might be a good time to bring up that same technique we used earlier for a specular highlight. She's inside of a restaurant. Maybe there's a light or something, and it's creating this highlight on the glass. So I'll do that same technique. I'll create a new layer. I'll paint with white. Maybe make it a little bit bigger, like so. And change the blending mode to color dodge. Again, no difference, but if I adjust opacity, it's different than when I adjust fill. See that?
Yep.
And the trick that we learned earlier was that if we double click on the layer to bring up the layer style window, we can click on the transparency shapes layer and you get a really, really strong highlight. You can press OK, and then just adjust the fill opacity from here, and I can just move it and place it accordingly. So it's up to you where you think the highlight would be. You can press Control-T, Command-T to transform, scale it up, maybe put it in the corner here. There's like some bright highlight there. I don't know, maybe, there's like a light or something. I see a lot of lights here in the restaurant. Maybe there's another one closer to us, and we put it there. So we have a nice highlight. You could also scale it down and just make it really, really narrow like so. And now it's just like a brighter highlight on top.
Cool.
So just adding those little details help the composite become more realistic. One thing that I'll do is, usually when I'm working on a composite like this, I like going into my libraries panel, and I like searching in Adobe stock for little assets that could help me bring in more, just small details that make the composite more realistic.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have anything saved in my current libraries, so I'm just gonna type in grunge and see if I have some sort of grunge texture. And I think I don't have any here. Actually, you know what I'll do with that first image that I used earlier? The internet should be working, so actually I'm just gonna download one from Adobe stock, and we'll just, I'll show you what I really would do, like if I were at home working on this.
Yeah,
so
we can put it through its paces.
Yeah, so I could just type in, grunge, let me texture. Because I want to add some dirt onto there. I don't want it to be completely clean. And I'm just looking through these. I'm not really sure which one of these is the best one. Maybe this one. Click and drag it onto my composite.
And I don't know about you, but I don't know, when I look through these, and I've done this sort of application of textures or snow or bokeh or whatever on top of images, it's always really helpful to be using the ones that are either black on white or white on black, because you can either use a multiplier or a screen, and it's just like...
Exactly.
You don't have to worry with color, anything like that.
So this is the layer here, and there is a watermark there. You can barely see it, but there is a watermark, and obviously it's really blurry or whatever, but that's okay. So I can change the blending mode to multiply like you were saying, and I can just bring the opacity way, way down. Barely noticeable. I just want it to not be so clean, you know what I mean? Just barely noticeable, something like that. And since I like it, I can now right click and select license image. And if the internet gods help me out, this will load pretty quickly, and I can press OK to license the image and get the full resolution version.
Yeah, which is cool because you've already placed it in your document, you've applied the blending mode, you've reduced the opacity, you've transformed it maybe. All it's going to do is say, oh, here you go, here's the high resolution.
Here's the high res.
Everything you've done is still applied.
Yep. And you can see, I think it just downloaded. It's still downloading now, but it'll take just a couple more seconds, and the high resolution, as you said, the high resolution will come in, replace the low res, the watermark will be removed, and now I'm ready to keep on working.
Yeah, and it'll kind of like crisp up and look much better.
One thing that you have to pay attention to is the order of your layer stacks. Even though in this case it really doesn't make a difference, I don't want the dirt to be on top of the highlight, so I would just drag the highlight above the dirt. So just, you gotta keep those little details in mind. What I'll do now is I'll hold Shift, click on the busy city layer, which is the city background, press Control G, Command G on the Mac, and that's our before and after. Very simple, just by using blending modes.
Yeah, super cool.
Super easy. So if I hold Shift and click on both layers, I highlight them, we'll do it once again, convert it into a smart object. And this is pretty much the process I do most of the times with my composites. Camera raw filter, and now I can control it as a single image. In this case, what I probably would do just, and I'll zoom in this time, I don't need to mask it, just so that we can see what I would do in something like this. I would go into the split toning effect, so I can apply a color to the shadows. So maybe I can make my shadows, I don't know, maybe like a blue-green color, something like that. And maybe increase the contrast, clarity. I'll even increase the vibrance. And of course, something I almost always do is add just a little bit of grain to make all these images cohesive. especially when you blur an image. So if you remember, we blur the background.
Yeah.
So we lost all film grain, and that doesn't look very natural. But if you add just a little bit of grain, it brings it back, makes everything more cohesive, and it makes it look, makes it look more natural. You can press OK. And that's our window effect. I think the green might be a little too strong, but you get the idea. You can come back and fine tune it. And if you zoom in, you can see all those little details there, including the dirt, the grain, that just helps add to the effect.
Yeah, it's amazing, and all in, maybe 10 minutes or less or something.
And I'm talking, I'm explaining things, but if I was just working, this could have been done in maybe 2 minutes without explaining it, obviously.
Yeah, for those of you that are just joining us, welcome. We've got Jesús Ramirez here. We're talking about fundamentals of compositing, and specifically how you can use blending modes to composite images together, obviously to create something realistic, this sort of window reflection effect, or as we saw earlier, something really kind of graphical, a more designerly approach, I'd say, to images. And I'm sure we've got some more lessons coming up. We're a half hour away from reviewing challenge submissions too, so if you're new to that, we're asking you to create a postcard in Photoshop of your hometown, and we'll take a look at those. I'm sure we have a number already submitted. Always a good way to get feedback on your work and get a little bit of practice in, maybe over lunch.
While doing banking.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I'm going to close this file, and we're going to move on to something else. It still has to do with blending, but not necessarily blending mode. Actually, I have one more thing with blending mode. Sorry, forgot about that. One more thing. So this is part of a composite that I did. I only included 3 layers. This is actually many more layers, but I just merged them down for the example. Actually, this image made it to the cover of the Photoshop User magazine about, I think, 2 years ago.
All right.
But it's on my Behance page, and you can check that out. And actually, so you could see what the actual image looks like. I'll go into Behance, and you can see the assets I use right here. So that's the final image there. I only use those images. And like I said, it made it into the cover of the magazine. And we don't need to watch this, but there's a GIF animation of how the project was completed.
I always find those so intriguing, and I'm always really grateful actually when artists and designers include this, because short of watching, a ton of tutorials to learn how to get things done, sometimes if you kind of have an idea of how to get something done, just to see how other people order their layering and get it done, you can kind of follow along and then learn in that way too. And
I think you might be a little like me, where once you have a certain amount of experience, you really don't need to watch a tutorial. Like you said, you can just watch, something like this and then realize how they made it. But anyway, so that's where this came from. And I mentioned this already, but I didn't really show it, so I want to show it so people get an understanding of what I was talking about. So we have this bear layer, right? And if I wanted to make an adjustment to the bear, it doesn't really matter what adjustment, we'll just say curves. And I'll clip the layer to the layer below, and I'll make an extreme adjustment so that you can see it. So I made an adjustment to the bear. But what if my client or I decide that I want a second bear? Well, I can press Control-J, Command-J on the Mac, and now I have a second bear. So what if I want to apply the same adjustment to that bear? I have 2 choices. I can duplicate the curves adjustment layer, press Control-G, Command-G on the Mac, and then apply the same thing to the bear. But if I later decide, you know what, I need to make an adjustment. Oh wait, I have to make the same adjustment to that bear. So you can kind of see what the problem is, right? You don't have the flexibility of changing both adjustment layers at the same time. And I know some of you may be thinking, well, you can just make a selection out of the bears. And right now I'm holding Control and then Shift, holding Control again and clicking on both layer thumbnails. And that loads the opaque pixels in the layer. And then I can just create one curves adjustment layer, right? And make my adjustment. But what if I decide to move one of my bears? Then I would have to recreate the mask.
Yep.
So you can kind of see the issue. And this is just with 2 layers. Maybe I have 5 bears or 6 bears or whatever it is. So then the problem gets bigger. So one of the solutions is something that I talked about earlier, which is creating a group, dragging your layers in there, and then making your adjustment. So I'll make an extreme adjustment. If I change the blending mode from pass through, which is a default blending mode that just passes everything through to the layers below, to normal, then it contains those adjustments to that layer. So now I can have any number of adjustment layers applying all kinds of different effects, and they will only affect the contents of that group. So I can have, 30 bears if I want to. The effect will only be applied to the contents of that group. So that could be a really useful technique when you're working with a lot of layers that you want to apply exactly the same adjustment layers to and have the flexibility of moving things around.
Yep, without like merging things or creating one single layer that can
exactly.
And maybe this will make it on the next Photoshop user.
I hope so.
Update
yeah.
to it.
This is a little, I don't know why it feels like a little Andy Warhol a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure. The sort of like repetitive elements and different pop colors.
Exactly. So that's the last thing with blending modes. And I'm going to move on to something similar to blending modes. Somebody said I would have put the layer outside and applied a clipping mask to the group. That could work. But as I said when I started earlier, I like to be super organized. If I'm clipping 3-4 adjustment layers on top of a group, that kind of destroys my organization, in Photoshop. It would work, and that's certainly an alternative, but I just like to keep things more organized and concise.
It's also kind of interesting to me, even though there are multiple ways to do it, to know though that you have that option that it defaults to pass through, and I've almost always just disregarded that basically out of not really understanding. So I don't know, it's just another thing that you can control and own and say, oh, well, now I actually know how this works.
Yeah, and we talked about it yesterday where, at the end of the day, I'm not a fan of techniques, I'm a fan of results. Yeah. So if you want to clip 1,000 layers on top of a group, knock yourself out. But, I like to show ways that I think are organized, because I come from a production artist background where I was opening PSDs that I didn't create, and sometimes they're a mess. Yeah. So I never wanted somebody to open up my PSD and be a mess. So I got that in the back of my head, like, you have to be organized, even though these days I'm the only one that sees my PSDs.
You never know, though. Yeah.
You never know, right? So I like to be as organized as I can. So now we're going to talk about blend if. We talked about it yesterday with the sky replacement. We're going to talk a little bit more about it today to really, really dive in and see how it works. So we have this layer, titled blend if, this group rather, excuse me. And it's just a gradient going in a circle. So white going all the way to black. Something I want to point out before we start is the RGB values. So we talked about yesterday that every single image is made up by 3 channels, the red, the green, and the blue. And those channels create every image that you see in Photoshop. And those channels have up to 255 levels of gray. And obviously 0 is the lowest, which makes black. So we go from 0 to 255. And understanding that will help you understand the values that you're going to see in the next step. So if I double click to the side of the layer, as you saw earlier, we get the layer style dialog box, and we have this really cool feature here called blend if. It basically means blend this layer to the layer below based on the values that I select. So you see here it says this layer, we have 0, which is black, 255, which is white. See the black point here? White point there. Right now, Photoshop is saying everything between 0 and 255 is visible, which makes sense, right? Because the entire layer is visible. But if we click and drag this point, notice how now that circle starts disappearing. See that? So now Photoshop is saying between 103 and 255, those are the visible areas. Anything under 103 will be invisible. So if you remember from earlier, 0 was black. So 103 is, a darker gray. So from black to a darker gray, we're gonna have that invisible. We can do the opposite. See that? So now we have white or 147, any gray between 147 and white, which is 255, will be invisible. If you hold Alt, Option on the Mac on either of these points, they'll split in half. And now notice this, there's a smooth transition. So now between this point and this point, we're gonna have a gradual transition, and then the pixels will become invisible. So I think this illustrates very clearly what's going on, right? So how can we use this on an image? We have this text layer in front of these clouds. If we wanted to bring those clouds forward so that it would seem as if the text was behind them, we can use blend if. I can double click on the side of the layer, but this time we're gonna use the luminosity of the underlying layer, the layer below. So same theory, just using the pixels below, not the pixels of the layer that you're on. So you can click and drag on this point and you can see how the darker pixels start coming in, but that's not what we want. We want the opposite. We want the brighter pixels to come in. So if we click and drag to the left, see how the clouds start coming through? We can use that same trick of holding Alt Option in the Mac and splitting those. And now it seems as if the text is behind the clouds. See that? Really, really quickly. We didn't have to worry about creating layer masks or anything like that.
Right, which typically with things like clouds or hair or really complex, trees and plants and things gets super difficult to get those like intermediate or values that are not quite fully opaque. That's amazing.
Exactly.
I saw an option in there. It says blend if gray. What's in that drop down, and is that relevant?
Yeah, it is. That's where we're going next. Thank you. You're
I didn't know that.
Such a great student. Yeah. So gray, right? So right now we were talking about the gray values, but we then have the channels red, green, and blue. And let me show you the graphic here. That graphic right there. So I can double click to the side of the layer to bring up the blend if. And you're asking...
I'm just going to say that people's minds are blown by what you just showed. Then we're taking a look at chat and everybody's like, what?
When I discovered blend if, my mind was blown.
And now somebody's talking about student loans. I'm not really sure. Maybe we can make those disappear with Photoshop.
I guess I would assume that the implication behind that is why did I pay so much money to go to school where I could learn online?
I know, with the Behance membership.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we should put up our PayPal account so they could, send us their tuition money.
Yeah, we'll take far less than tuition money.
Yeah, I mean, 50% less.
Buy us lunch, 50%, exactly. Blend if.
So blend if, right? And your question, Michael, was there's this little gray box. Like, what's that about? Well, we were working with the luminance values of the image, but we can also work with the red, the green, and the blue channel. So this works very simply. So the red channel, gets rid of the pixels that are in red. See that on top? If I go all the way to the left, guess what it remains?
The things with no red at all.
And the opposite of red is, when talking about RGB?
Cyan.
Cyan, exactly. When we go to the green channel, you can take everything that's green and we're left with magenta, exactly. And with blue, we remove that down all the way. Oops, I clicked on the wrong one. I did the underlying layer. Yep.
There's no opposite of blue.
There is no opposite of blue. The opposite of blue is yellow. So the opposite of red is cyan, the opposite of green is magenta, the opposite of blue is yellow. If you don't remember that, there's so many places in Photoshop where you could see it. One of the best ways of seeing it visually, I think, is in the color balance adjustment layer. See that? Red, cyan, green, magenta, blue, yellow. So that relationship is all over Photoshop. Another way of seeing it is if you go into image mode. I'm currently in the RGB color mode. Right under that, cyan. Right under the G, M for magenta. Right under B, blue for yellow. So there's so many places in Photoshop where you could see that. So that's what that does. Now, just to be clear, what's happening there is we're going into the channel. See that? Red, green, blue. Let's look at the red channel. So when I was dragging the white point, remember that the red disappeared? And as you pointed out, the areas that remain are areas with no red, which in turn leaves cyan. And that's the same thing for every channel, right? Or you can remove cyan and just stay with red if you wanted to by dragging the black point. So that's what that information is. I'm sorry, that's what those sliders do. And once you have that knowledge, you can take an image like this one, and this is basically the same example we saw yesterday, where you can apply, we can change the sky really easy, because if you go into the RGB modes, you'll see that in the blue channel, there's a lot of contrast between the foreground and the background. The background is obviously the sky, which is going to be almost white because the sky is blue, and then green and the brown and the branches and stuff are not going to have so much blue. So we're going to be able to use those sliders to make a sky replacement really, really easily. So with this trees adjustment layer, this trees layer, we have underneath that the clouds layer, and we can double click to the side of the layer, and you can probably guess what we're going to do. Go into the blue channel, and then remember that the sky in the channels panel was blue in the blue channel. So was white in the blue. I'm getting everybody confused. I think I just confused myself. Just to point out what I'm saying here. In the blue channel, the sky is white, right? So that's what we want to target. So I'm gonna go into the blend this drop down, select blue, and we want to target the white. See that white there? Click and drag it to the left, and look at that. The sky from the background comes up. I can hold Alt Option to the max, split those in half to create a smoother transition, and press OK. So really easily we were able to remove the sky or replace the sky.
Yeah, super easy because nobody wants to mask those trees out.
Exactly.
I mean, as good as Photoshop gets with doing it algorithmically, it's just this is a much I think quicker, easier way.
Super
to get
easy.
It done.
And we talked about this yesterday, but I'll show it again for those of you who are not watching yesterday. If you want to get actual luminosity, because right now there's no luminosity. If you look at the thumbnail, you can still see the sky. And if I press Control, Command, and the Mac and click on that layer, it creates a selection around the entire canvas, which means that every single pixel in there is still there.
Yep.
If you wanted to get actual transparency, what you need to do is right-click on the layer and convert it to a smart object, and you can now see in the layer thumbnail that we have transparent pixels. If I hold Control, Command, and the Mac and click, we actually load the pixels that are now truly opaque. And if you're thinking, well, what if I want to make an adjustment to the blend diff? You can always double-click on here and then make adjustments to it by bringing that up and then just changing it, pressing OK, closing it, and saving it, and it changes.
Great.
So really, really cool stuff. Now, I do have another example. So for those of you that are working with text, so I have this text layer titled Rust. I have Rust on here. I'm gonna press Control Alt G, Command Option G on the Mac. So now I have my rusty text. So maybe I wanna get rid of the brighter parts, so I'm only left with the rust area underneath. So I can double click to the side of the layer and use the gray section for that. And I can just hide, see this? How I'm hiding the brighter areas, like so. I can hold Alt Option on the Mac and click to split those in half. And obviously it's up to you how you would use these sliders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, a really amazing kind of effect there at the end. It's so simple.
So easy, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. You know what you want to do. You just, but if you know the tools, you're like, oh yeah, this is probably the easiest way to do it because I know that this is bright, and I know that with this I can get rid of the bright pixels or whatever it may be. And you can do the opposite. Maybe you want to keep the top part and remove the rust. You can just drag this to the right, and it removes the rust.
Amazing.
So,
yeah. So we have a question about the underlying layer, blend diff with the underlying layer. There was, I think, some confusion. It's kind of easy to see, okay, I'm working on this layer, this blend diff rule that I'm applying by messing with the sliders is applying to this layer, thus revealing underneath.
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk us back through how the underlying layer works? Because you're still working on the top layer, but the rule you're applying seems to be looking at the bottom layer for that information.
Well, I'll try to answer that and explain it in this example. So right now I'm working with this layer, right? So it's only looking at the values of that layer to make the blend. See that? So here I'm just removing the darker pixels because I'm clicking and dragging on the black point.
Yep.
And here I'm removing the bright pixels because I'm clicking and dragging on the white point. So it's on this layer. The underlying layer is just that layer below. And the reason it's such a harsh transition is because it's basically just a solid.
Solid.
Yeah. So it's the same theory. You're just telling Photoshop, where am I looking for the values? Am I looking at them in this layer, or am I looking for the values on the layers below? I don't know if that was clear or not.
Yeah. hopefully it was.
I mean, let me show you. I think that if I do it this way, so I'm just gonna make a layer mask, and I'm gonna click and drag the rust layer on top. I think this will work if I double click on it. I should be able to, yeah, see that? See how I'm now bringing the pixels from the underlying layer? See that?
It's looking for the dark parts in the textured layer
Yeah,
at the bottom and
yeah.
saying, okay, I'm going to reveal those now.
Exactly.
Or I'm going to make those disappear.
Exactly. So it's the same theory. And sometimes, like for example, in this case, for me, it makes more sense for the texture to be on top. And it just, it works in my brain. So
Right, yeah. Well, you're almost thinking about it as if in real life.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this rust would be on these letters.
Exactly.
in a way.
Right. So yeah, any other questions on BlendIf before we move on? I think that was the last I had on it. Actually, I like that question. Can you show me how to put my face on people's photos? Can I answer that?
Yeah.
All right. So, does anyone, including you, Michael, do you know a YouTuber, and he's actually been around for a while. He's written 20 books on Photoshop called Colin Smith from Photoshop Cafe.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
All right, he's a really, really good friend of mine. And I was telling him, hey, man, you got to get a new Facebook profile picture. Because I think he needs it.
You need to update it every now and then.
And I told him, hey man, I'll help you out. So I'm gonna show you guys how to, and let me rasterize this. Let's see if I can do this right, because I haven't done this in a while. But I like that question. I remember I had that file in here, so we're gonna see if it works. So I said, hey man, I can get that photo and put your face on there, super easy, super quickly. So yeah, let's see if we can do it. So I'm just gonna duplicate the layer just in case it doesn't work the first time. So that's Colin Smith, Photoshop Cafe. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. I'm making fun of him, so at the very least, help him out.
Right.
Photoshop Cafe on YouTube. Yeah. So I'm just gonna make a selection around his face, like so. And if Paul Tranny also needs another Facebook picture, profile picture, we can do that as well. So there it is. So I'm just going to mask that right there. And I'm actually going to apply the layer mask. So now that's actually a destructive effect. So we are literally destroying pixels here, but that's okay. Then I'm gonna bring them here and then press Control T, Command T to transform and scale it. And you know what? I'm still not used to the shift on Photoshop. So let me try that again.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, in the latest release of Photoshop, I mean, just like from a few months ago, when you scale things down, it used to be that you would hold the Shift key to keep the proportions constrained. Otherwise, you can kind of freeform it. Now the opposite is true. The default is that it will constrain, which I actually like. Mm-hmm. It just takes a long time to get used to.
Yeah. And actually, on my YouTube channel, I have a tutorial on how you can edit a Photoshop file so that it brings back the old. It's like a hack. You just put in this code and drop it into the preferences folder, and it brings back the old, the old function. So after I did the tutorial, I kind of left that file in there. So I finally gotten used to the shift. Then I did the tutorial, and it reverted it back.
You made it hard on yourself.
And I made it hard on myself. Yeah. But anyway, so right now I have Colin's face on the model. So I basically just, try to match it as best as I could, right? And I think I may need to move his face to the right a little and bring that down. And you can distort it if you want to, obviously it's not the same angle, so I can go into warp and maybe warp it, try to get the face to match as close as possible, right? So then what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna hold Control, Command the Mac, and I'm going to click on the layer thumbnail to load it as a selection. And I'm gonna go to Modify Contract, and I'll contract it 5 pixels. It'll bring it in. So now I have that edge inside of there. I'm just gonna duplicate this layer so that I can hit delete on here, and that made a hole. See that?
Yep.
Made a hole. So now I can select both these layers, go into Edit, Auto Blend Layers, Panorama is fine. Seamless tones and colors, check. Content aware, fill, transparent areas, everything's perfect. Press OK, and if I did it correctly, Photoshop will blend those 2 layers and match the skin tone and everything else.
Wow.
And my good friend Colin Smith now has a new Facebook profile picture. So
and his friend request will just
pile
he's
going to
now.
be the most popular guy on Facebook after this. So yeah, I mean,
I didn't know about the auto blend.
Yeah, usually that's used for panoramas.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
again, if you think about, the thing is when it comes to Photoshop, yeah, of course, look at the labels and see what the labels say, but you don't have to use it for what the label says. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you understand what it's doing,
Yeah.
then you're like, oh, all I'm really doing is matching, pixels or merging pixels
Right.
and matching the
Right.
tone or whatever. And you can use it for other things.
Amazing. And now people's minds are blown.
Yeah, so there you go. There he is. See that? And the cool thing about the auto blend is with the newer versions of Photoshop, it gave us this merge layer. See that? It says merge. In older versions of Photoshop, and I forget when the change happened, but definitely if you don't have CC, then what you will see is an actual layer that we would get these 2 layers merged and the color tone will be applied. The new version of Photoshop just puts it all in one new layer for you, so you can still have the separate layers.
If it doesn't kind of do what you want, you can just
go back delete
and
it and redo it.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
All right.
So how did you get there? Was it under edit? Yeah, so it's under edit. Where did it go? Here we go. It was grayed out because I didn't have the 2 layers selected.
2 layers selected.
Yeah, so it's auto blend layers. Excuse me, auto blend layers.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm expecting everybody to have a really, really great Facebook profile picture tomorrow.
Right.
Or not Facebook. It could be Tinder. It could be Instagram.
Yeah.
It could be whatever.
And no complaint from Colin
And
sitting in your inbox like, hey,
Yeah.
I saw what you did on live.
Exactly. So yeah, so since we embarrassed them, Photoshop Cafe, give him a shout out and subscribe. He's got great Photoshop tutorials.
Yeah.
All right. I'm glad I saw that question and
Yeah, it's cool. And if anybody has any more questions, it'd be awesome. Do you have another? I want to remind everybody there's about 7 minutes left before we're gonna.
7 minutes. Oh man, I still have like 3 folders worth of stuff. But
all right.
Let me think of what would be. All right, so okay, we'll do this one. I think 7 minutes in is cool. So this actually kind of relates to what we were talking about yesterday. So yesterday we talked about how one of the most important things when creating composites is that you needed to find the horizon line of an image, right? So if we follow all the parallel converging lines of this scene, we'll end up at a vanishing point right there. That means that the horizon line of this scene is right about there, give or take. There it is. And something that I didn't mention yesterday that I think is really important is really will help you visualize, especially when you're working with Adobe stock images that have a plain white background and you really can't tell where the horizon line is when you look at an object, if you can see the bottom side of the object, that means that the horizon line is below the object. If you can see the top, then that means the horizon line is above. And you can see that yourself. If you look out straight in front of you, like for example, we have a table in front of us. If we're looking forward, we obviously can see the top of the table.
Right.
But if the table was higher than our eyesight, then we wouldn't be able to see the top of the table. We would see the underside of the table, right? So when you're compositing, that usually is something that people don't think about. What part of the object am I looking at? Oh,
Right.
I can see the top part. That means that this thing has to be below the horizon line if I want it to be in perspective.
Right.
Obviously, if you're creating a scene that's surreal or the object is floating, then you don't have to worry about that. But if you want to make things look realistic, you have to think about these things. So, so we have that box and that crate. If we follow the converging lines, obviously, we're not going to get the right perspective, and it doesn't work. And no matter how much we scale it and what we do, it's just not going to work. For organic objects, you really can't do much. But for objects like these, like houses, crates, cars, trucks, and things like that, we can actually distort the perspective and try to make it match within the scene. And I can right-click on this and convert it into a smart object to work non-destructively. And to change the perspective of this, I can go into Edit, Perspective Warp. there's 2 steps to perspective warp. Number 1 is you have to find the faces of the perspective of the object. So in this case, we have 3. There's 1. Click and drag on the other side. Notice the blue highlight, release, it snaps into place.
Super helpful.
And let me just place it as best as I can. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. It snaps here, and I can place it there. So now that I set up my perspective grid, I can click on warp, and I can click and drag on the perspective of my crate. See that? Super cool.
Yeah.
So all you really need to do now is just match the perspective of the scene as best as you possibly can. And what I probably would need to do here is just commit it and then bring it down, because since we can see the top, then the crate will be probably right about there, and I can scale it as well. And I think I made it a little too small, but I think you get the idea.
Totally.
And since it's a smart object, I can double click on the perspective warp label, and I can continue editing the perspective. You can also hold shift and click on on the lines. They turn yellow, click, and it straightens those lines. See that?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you can control them together. So obviously you can fine tune the crate. So that looks way more realistic than that. See that?
Yep.
It actually looks like it's sitting on that floor.
Yeah, now all you need is a little shadow underneath.
Exactly.
it.
All you need is a little shadow. And I mean, since you mentioned it, to do that, you can create a blank layer. And there's so many ways of creating shadows.
Yeah.
The easiest way for something like this would probably be to just paint the contact shadow like right under it, like so, and something like that. Obviously that's a little quickly, but you get the idea.
Super cool.
Yep.
People are calling this next level wizardry.
Awesome.
Nice. Well, we have 2 minutes
2
left.
minutes. What can I show you guys?
Like a quick fire?
In
In those 2 minutes, if you're working on your daily challenge submission, be sure to save it out as a JPEG or PNG and submit it to the WooBox gallery so that we can take a look at it. Because in about 2 minutes, we'll just go ahead and take a look at what's there. So make sure you get it in on time. And of course, if you're still working, there's a stream coming up after this, and you could submit it for that stream as well.
So you were talking about creating shadows, right? So I'm going to try to create 2 shadows in hopefully 2 minutes. So I'm going to go a little fast. So one of the ways in which you can create a shadow, of course, is by double-clicking on the side of the layer, clicking on Drop Shadow. But obviously, this doesn't look very realistic, right? So what you can do is take that out of the adjustment layer. So you can click on the FX icon, and you can go into, oops, am I not clicking on it? Create layer. Press OK, and that creates a layer out of that layer style.
Wow.
I can press Control T, Command T to transform, and then, oops, I meant to go into distort. And then I could distort this shadow and try to, make it match in the scene, right? So that's one way of creating a shadow. And actually, that looks pretty good considering how quickly I did it.
Threw it there.
And but if you want to be fancy, you can select your layer, go into, actually, let me duplicate the layer, then go into 3D, new extrusion from selected layer, and just like everything else in compositing, you have to match the perspective. When you're working with 3D, you're gonna see the ground plane that's gonna show you where the horizon line is, which is this little gray outline, this gray line going there. So I have to match it to the scene, which is right about there. And I'm gonna reduce the extrusion depth, and I have an infinite light, which controls the lighting in the scene. And look at that, I have a shadow that goes right on my horse, right there. And
that's incredible.
And I can click on invisible. So the 3D geometry becomes invisible, but I still have my shadow. And I can come back into my composite, and there it is. There's the shadow. And obviously I would have to just, adjust it just a little tiny bit. But you get the idea.
That's incredible. Yeah, and if anybody's a little bit intimidated, the 3D workspace is definitely a little bit different to work in.
It definitely is, yeah.
Yeah, we should have you back just to kind of
do some 3D stuff.
Keep going into that.
Yeah.
But I know we'll talk about Dimension tomorrow. That's the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay,
Wow.
so there you go. So yeah, that was 2 shadows in 2 minutes.
That's amazing. We should do like a lightning round like that with every stream.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I hope everybody thought, I mean, I'm blown away. So many things I've learned. I've been here at Adobe for a while. I know that everybody's been mind blown. We're going to take a look at some of the submissions from today, and we'll get through them hopefully relatively quickly. And, you know, we might have another little lightning round after, or maybe not, but we definitely want to see your work from today. So I'm going to share that. And just to remind everybody, the idea was to use Photoshop to create a postcard for your hometown. And we might see a little bit of compositing. We might see a little bit of creative layering. This is Estes Park, Colorado.
Nice.
Yeah. So what do you, I mean, clearly kind of surrealistic scene.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the elk there are that big, but maybe.
Maybe, but the one thing, I mean, that could be like a giant statue, right? Or a monster or whatever. Yeah. The one thing I will say is we talked about it yesterday, which was adding a black and white adjustment layer to everything else. See the luminance values. Clearly, the elk has a lot more contrast, is darker than the rest of the image. So I would use that black and white adjustment layer to see that, and then adjust it with a levels or curves adjustment layer. Right, and what you mentioned yesterday, the concept of atmospheric perspective. Right.
You see these mountains, they're far away, and because they're far away, they have less contrast, they're a little bit flatter, and you can see the shadows are blue, maybe a little bit of purple even, but it's a cool blue color in there. If you apply that same thinking to the elk, because the elk is at a mid distance between them, it would actually have a little bit of blue cast in the shadows. It would be a little bit flatter, and as things get closer to the camera, they have more contrast.
Yeah, and additional to that is in daytime images, or images or in real life really, things that are closer to you also have warmer colors. So you can look at those trees that are closer to us. For example, the one on the far right, notice how much warmer they are. Then the same trees will be back in the mountains. So things that are closer to you will be warmer, things that are further will be cool. The opposite is true in morning and sunset. Sunrise and sunset, yeah.
Well, Timothy Buck sent that in, which is not a joke, I'm sure, but I kind of like it because there's a buck in the scene. All right, Tan Moy, I know they submitted yesterday, so we have sort of an original source image and then what looks to be kind of an interesting photographic effect applied to it.
Yeah, it looks like they apply some color adjustments to it, some color toning.
What do you think about the overall? I mean, taking it from this sort of dark run-of-the-mill shot to something more cinematic.
I think they did a really good job in just making an image that was so into something a little more interesting. I like how they use the contrast between the blue on the left and the red on the right. So it's I think they took a very average-looking photo into something much more interesting.
Yeah, I agree, and I think as you continue to think about making dynamic scenes from something just like everyday life, it appears this person's maybe on a bicycle or running or something, maybe crouching a little bit lower with the camera, the figure ends up taking a much more present spot, and you kind of have a little bit more dynamics. In fact, the leading lines from the scene around it would lead into the person. Maybe apply kind of like a motion blur effect out, get something really cinematic.
Because there's some motion blur going on already.
Right, yeah.
It might be nice to just enhance it and even push it further, yeah.
Cool. So thank you for submitting. Diana Odessa.
1974. I like it a lot. I could see this like on a postcard, like at a store, like it's like almost ready to, be purchased. So I like it.
Absolutely. I love the kind of creative use of brushes to give you, the composite, make a graphical effect. Yeah, it's.
And I like how it reads 2019 there on top. It's barely noticeable.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I like this one a lot.
Yeah, thank you for submitting.
Nora.
I don't know where this is.
I don't know.
Somebody should let us know. Cool. A lot of elements in here. The vertical symmetry is really appealing. You have a really clear central spot.
Yeah.
And a lot of good-looking things to kind of focus your eye on.
Yeah, I'm loving the buildings in the background. I think they look really, really cool. Yeah, those are buildings, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that might be a clue to where it is. But they've kind of taken on like a grungy kind of effect back there.
And it looks like they were inverted as well, at least from what I could tell. It's really cool.
Yeah, super cool. Lots of great imagery in here. Thank you, Riard. Oklahoma. This is the neighboring state from where I grew up.
Nice. Okay, I don't remember, but I don't remember the name of the figure there, but it's I thought there's a famous either statue or something there that has it. Or I'm probably confusing it with a different state, but I like that on there. If it's something that's related to like a monument that's known there.
Yeah, it might actually be interesting. I don't know if this came from a photograph or maybe it was done with like the pen tool or something and it's just a flat graphic, but to actually maybe increase the opacity of whatever this is as it goes out to the panhandle to balance out this bison, and I don't know, just create another point of interest up here where
they
it just
could have
gets
tried
flat.
the double exposure effect we used earlier in the stream.
But cool, nice graphical style, looks thematic to Oklahoma from what I know about it. All right,
Georgetown, I like this.
Oh yeah, this is really...
What's kind of what you were talking about in the previous photo, that angle that creates, a more dynamic, more interesting look. It's really cool.
Yeah, this one's a big one, so I'm going to try and get most of it on screen, but we'll have to go up and down. You're totally right. It kind of has like a warping, overpowering effect, which is dizzying, but it's kind of magical in a way as well. Lots of monuments that I've never even heard of, I imagine. This arch and...
Wish you were. I like it.
Yeah.
I like the frame around it too. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, great use of brushes and textures, which was definitely part of the...
See, on that one, on that palm tree, they might have been better off using the blend if technique.
Oh, blend if,
you can see how it looks like it was masked just because there's a lot of...
fringing.
Fringing,
Cool. So maybe apply that technique from today. Toronto.
It's the nice one.
Yeah, this is nice and clean.
I really like the typography on this one. It just blends in so nice with the city, I think.
Yeah, it's subtle.
Yeah.
I'd almost, well, this is a nitpick, but I'd almost like to see, the bottom of the baseline of the typography is right at that horizon line, which is pleasing to a certain extent. Sometimes actually creating a little bit of tension, maybe bringing it just below it, can increase some of the interest, and maybe the water, maybe the type is kind of sitting in the water just a little bit.
Yeah.
But hard to complain. This is a really gorgeous comp. These graphical elements are fun. And maybe a little bit of blend if, although that could kind of help with the clouds.
Exactly.
Super fun. Probably not an easy thing to think about your layers of depth and masking within this. Thank you, Wendy. This is kind of a neat take. It's the postcards themselves are put in context, which is always kind of nice.
I really like the wooden texture of the pen. I mean, it's a really interesting take. I like it.
Yeah. Do you see, is there an opportunity here at all? Like, would some of this image kind of reflect up on this pen at all?
Oh, it depends on theoretically what kind of paper was printed, right? But sure. The one thing that does bother me a little bit is that the lighting on the pen doesn't really, because clearly the pen was shot like in a studio or something to create that really strong highlight. So maybe I would try to reduce that a little bit, just because the rest of the image doesn't have that feel.
Yeah. But super cool, these images. I don't know if they were taken by you, but those are gorgeous works of art on their own as well. So nice to see them in context.
Claddy.
And I believe, I'll just refresh this one more time to see. I believe that was it from today. So lots of good submissions. If you're working on something right now and want to submit it, we've got another stream starting in 20 minutes. So that's a good time. It's the same challenge. They'll take a look at them as well. But I don't know, it's kind of cool. We've got about 15 minutes left. You have some more things to show?
Always.
Cool. Does everybody want to see some more Photoshop magic?
So, just because I just thought about something. Yesterday I showed an Easter egg, so I'll show a different one today. But for the people that missed the Easter egg yesterday, I'll quickly reference it. I'm sure you have been seeing oh no, you haven't. The banana tool right under me, right there. It's been hitting this whole time. So with the banana tool, it doesn't do anything. It's just an icon. If you want to see it, On your toolbar, you can go into Edit Toolbar, and you can hold Shift and click on Done. And yesterday, I promised I was going to show people how to get rid of it, and I never did. So to get rid of it, you can go into Edit Toolbar once again, and you hold Option, which is Alt on a PC, and click on Done, and it goes away. So that's one of the, so that's how you would get rid of that banana. So the other Easter egg I have is if you press Control K, Command K on the Mac, it brings up the Preferences panel. If you go to the interface, into the Appearance under Color Theme, you can change the interface colors, right, by clicking on these buttons. But notice how I have coffee cups and I have toast. So if you hold Control Shift Alt as you click on those, you get those little coffee cups and toast. So you can actually bet people that there is coffee, toast, and bananas in Photoshop, and you'll win some money.
Whoa.
So you can go
Who's going to give you money for that?
Well, you can go up to your friends and say, I can guarantee you, like, I bet you $5 that I can, bring out a banana, toast, and coffee in Photoshop, and they'll be like, no way. I was like, watch. And then you do it, and they
amazing.
pay up.
Yeah.
And then they can PayPal us again.
Right, yeah. This is just a scheme, right?
This is a scheme, yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, the word is still out. We don't actually know how much the Photoshop engineers were thinking about breakfast, but we can kind of assume that they were maybe pretty hungry.
You guys need to feed your engineers.
Crew of engineers there.
Yeah, you guys have them locked up in the basement, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a very nice basement.
Yeah. All right, so let me see. Let me open up. How much time do I have?
15 minutes. I mean, we'll save a couple minutes for sign off, so we'll say like 13 minutes. 13 and a half minutes. I'm not going to be specific, but maybe like 13 minutes and 17 seconds.
Okay, so we did something with distortions. I guess I'll do something else with distortions as well. Because I have something that'll take 15 minutes, but I think you guys will probably enjoy something else a little bit better. So I know I have a file downloaded. I just don't know where it is into my Creative Cloud. So if you click on this drop down, you can select all libraries and then search your library. And I know it's a picture of a man. So let me see if it comes up really quickly. And if not, I can use a different one, but I kind of know what I want to use for this. Oh, this guy right here. That's what I want to use. So I'm just going to click and drag him over here. And we don't need the horse for this. So I'll get rid of him, delete that shadow. And for some reason I have the Adobe watermark, even though I downloaded it, but that's okay. It's not a big deal. What I'm going to do is click on the quick selection tool, click on select subject, because I want to make a quick selection out of him and I don't want to spend too much time making a selection. And look what a good job Adobe Sensei did. So use
especially
it,
with the
please.
white background.
And again, yeah, especially against a white background. And this is the thing when people say, oh, well, I'm fine with Photoshop CS3. Well, great, but then look at all this new technology that saves you all this time.
So much time.
Yeah. So I'm going to right click and convert it into a smart object to work non-destructively. So there it is. So a lot of times when you're compositing, sometimes the model or the stock image in this case that you got is not really in the right position. So you have to make distortions. So one of the coolest tools to distort images in Photoshop is the Puppet Warp, which gives you this mesh. I'm just going to click on Show Mesh just to disable it. And I can create these points. And if you work in After Effects, then you're familiar with this tool. It was in After Effects way before it was in Photoshop. And you can create these points. And I'm creating points in the joints. And I can click and drag these points to change the positioning of the body parts. And the cool thing about it is that if you hold Alt, Option in the Mac, this is what a lot of people don't know, and I'll zoom in so that you could see, and I'll apply it, that's okay. I can zoom in, so that's before and after. But if I double click on Puppet Warp, it brings back the point, and this is the key that most people don't use. If you hold Alt, Option in the Mac, you get that little circle thing.
Yeah.
You can click and drag to rotate it, and see how it rotates the joint? See, now he's like dancing, yay.
Nice.
And obviously you want to make sure that you don't distort it too much so that, like right there, like that looks unrealistic, obviously. You're breaking
It looks painful.
It looks very painful. So you do have to be careful, obviously, and then create more points where you need to and make sure that you adjust it. So one thing that you could do is maybe put that foot right there, right? But what if you want that foot in front of the other foot? Well, you can click on Pin Depth.
Wow.
Click on that. It comes up. There it is.
That's amazing.
So now he's in a different position. So that's before and after.
So you could potentially make an entire animated sequence
Exactly.
with a single stock image.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So that was one distortion thing that that you could use. How much more time do we have?
7 minutes.
7.
Eight?
I don't know if I can do this in
How
7
about 8
minutes. All right. We'll see how good I am. I'll because I have.
This is your daily creative challenge.
This is my daily creative challenge. So, what if you wanted to give somebody a new haircut?
Okay.
Let's try that.
Cool.
So,
or just hair in general, it looks like.
Hair in general, yeah. I mean, I was trying to be kind, but
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, sorry. I said it. He did look kind of mean.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna select the hair here, like so, and just mask it. Then I'm going to press Ctrl T, Command T to transform. And actually what I'll do, you know what, I'll just make that into a smart object now, because then I can just transform it as a smaller layer. And notice that I'm not even worried about the background yet. That's like the last thing I'll worry about.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that all these other things fit. So I'm just gonna try to get it as best as I can. And I know I have less than 10 minutes to do this. So I'm just trying to make the hair match as best as possible. So that's good enough for now. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm gonna create that black and white adjustment layer just to make things black and white. Notice how much brighter the model is in the hair. So I need to adjust that. So I'm going to create a levels adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below, and then just brighten that accordingly. Now, one thing that I will show you is, let me disable the layers, and just because I'd rather explain it, even though I'm not gonna do it perfectly, just so you guys understand. So when you make an adjustment, whether it's levels or whether it's curves, it's just easier to show with curves. You change the saturation. See that? See how I saturated the pixels? I don't want to do that. I just want to change the luminosity. So we'll use blending modes. See, if I change the blending mode to luminosity
on the adjustment layer.
On the adjustment layer, I no longer affect saturation. So normal, look at how saturated that is. Luminosity, I just adjusted the luminance values, not the saturation. So that's what I'm going to do with this levels adjustment layer. I'm going to change it to luminosity, so I just adjust the luminance values. So I have to fine tune it.
And what are you looking for here in general? Like that the light parts roughly equate to the light parts of the bottom image and the dark parts and then the mid-tone as well.
Exactly, right. So I can see how dark his beard is. So I'm trying to make sure his hair is almost that dark, but then, that's way too dark. So I gotta brighten that up. So you're just fine tuning things to try to make them look as realistic as possible. So that's before and after. So even just with that, you see how much better it looks? It looks more realistic. So now I can come in here, create a layer mask, and start blending pixels. Really, I don't have a Wacom tablet with me, but usually what I will do at home is adjust the pressure sensitivity on it and just kind of like blend pixels together. Yeah, so I can kind of fake that a little bit here, and that's what I'll do.
By the way, as you're doing this, we've had a number of people confirm that we have to invite you back. They said there's no way around it. So. And you've been here before, I know that. So it's we're almost certain that Jesus will be back with us.
And I live down the street.
Yeah.
I could almost walk home. But anyway, so that's more or less, and this is all fine tuning at this point, right? So I'm just fine tuning it, blending pixels. And how much time do I have so I know how much to fine tune?
5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes? Yeah, we can probably do it in 5 minutes. So see that? See how I'm just blending those pixels now, and it's starting to look just a little more realistic. See that? So that's before, after.
You generally just work with a typical soft brush and adjust the kind of size and pressure, or would you work with maybe any sort of texture or something in here?
For something like this, I would just do what you just described, no texture, none of that. And what I'll do now is actually, I'll go in here, and I will use the selected mask, and I will just use this brush to mask the hair. And I know it's not going to do a good job because this is the low resolution version of the file, for some reason, but that's okay. You'll get the idea. So I'm just removing all these pixels. And I don't need to be perfect. Again, like perfection comes when I know everything else is gonna work. And I'll just press OK. And also we have like 4 minutes now.
Yeah, it's a speed run. You're just testing the concept out to see if it'll even work.
Yeah. So there it is. Close it, save it. So I mean, that's already looking pretty good. And you know, at this point, I realized that I like the way the hair looks, but I think that his skin still looks a little too bright. So there's no rule that says I can't adjust the background.
Yep.
Right? So what I'll do is I'll just make a quick selection out of his face. And I'll use probably levels just because it'll be easier for people to see what I'm doing. I can just make the brighter pixels darker, like so. Maybe adjust the contrast. So that's before and after. And I think it just helps the hair look more cohesive.
Yeah.
And to be frank with you, I'm like almost done. Like at this point, all I'm really doing is just fine tuning. I would go in here and make sure that I don't have the white on the hair. I can even create layers where I can just, with a Wacom tablet, select like a color of strand of hair and just paint strands in there, you know what I mean? Like obviously with the mouse it doesn't look as good,
right?
But I could start painting in hair just to make it look a little more realistic. And that's how I would give this guy a new haircut. So again, in less than 5 minutes and explaining, which is really the most difficult part, I've been able to give him a nice little haircut.
Cool thing is, if he doesn't like it, you can just delete it.
Exactly, shave it all off. Yeah, and actually I do have a tutorial on my YouTube channel, and I think that tutorial is about 30 minutes long, so I really spend a little more time than I just did here. And if they want to see what the actual finished product looks like.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a couple minutes left. Maybe we could spend a minute just talking a little bit about the fundamentals that you covered today in general, if people want to learn more what it was all about, and then what we can focus on tomorrow, and maybe people can join us again.
Yeah, so we work mainly with blending modes in the beginning. So these algorithms that blend layers based on the components, luminosity, saturation, color. We also talked about blend if, which looks at the channels, and you use the luminosity of those channels to either show or hide pixels. We talked about merging people's faces using other techniques. And actually, you know what, now that I said that, because I want to drive that point home. So like, if I create, and I know I have like 2 minutes now, or maybe even less, but I'm just going to like create that arrow. It doesn't really matter. And I double click on the side of the layer here, brings up the layer style window. So there's something called an inner glow, right? And that's gonna make the inside of it glow, right? But that doesn't mean I have to use it as a glow. I could use it as a shadow, right? All the glow is really doing is applying a screen blending mode. But if I apply the blending mode multiply and change it to a darker color, now I have a shadow.
Yeah.
So that's the theory behind that face swapping technique, is that sure, the command was created for merging images together when you're doing panoramas.
Yeah.
But if you understand how the technology is working, you can use it for anything else that fits those same criteria. Same thing goes for layer styles. Just because the label says something doesn't mean you have to use it as to what the label describes.
Yeah.
If it gets you the result that you want, obviously.
Right, and almost all of these layer styles have the blend mode right there at the top. So it's sort of controlling everything that you do down at the bottom.
Exactly.
Which is incredible. So cool. And if people want to join in tomorrow, want to give a quick brief about what the kind of things you're going to focus on? Yeah,
we're going to continue working on compositing, distorting images and all of that. But one thing I do want to squeeze in the last part of the session is a little tiny bit of dimension. I know 3D can be scary for some people. So we're just going to show how you can bring in 3D objects to your composites. So we're going to work on a little composite. And then towards the end, we'll just bring a 3D model and show people how Dimension was really designed for people with no 3D experience, so that they could use 3D models really, really easily and create really photorealistic results just by clicking and dragging a few things.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to be talking about.
Super cool. I know I'm excited. Everybody that's joined us today, if you've had a good time, if you learned something today, we've got Jesus tomorrow for another 2 hours. It's the final day this week. So please tune in and stick around because Shauna Lynn is going to come back with Paul Tranny in just about 5 minutes, and there's going to be a lot more Photoshop magic, tips and tricks, things like that. So thank you for joining us today. We'll see you again tomorrow, and until then, take care.